You know how they say history is written by the victors? Well, what about the people who were so good at winning they got written out of the story entirely? That's what we're talking about today. We're going to uncover the life of a queen who literally commanded the seas, built a city from the ashes, and forced Europe's brand new superpowers to sit down and negotiate. Get ready to meet Sayyida al-Hurra.
Just listen to this. The sea obeyed her before it obeyed kings. And let me tell you, that was not just some fancy poetic line. For decades, back in the early 16th century, this was the hard political and military truth in one of the most important waterways on the entire planet.
So, how in the world does one woman end up commanding the sea itself? Well, our story kicks off right at the dawn in the 16th century. You've got these European fleets, spreading out across the globe. They're looking at North Africa and they're thinking, easy pickings. Weak, fragmented coastlines just ripe for conquest. Yeah, they were about to be proven very, very wrong. Okay, so you have the Spanish and Portuguese empires, these huge naval powers, and they're poking around the coast, basically looking for someone to roll over and pay them tribute. But what they found, it wasn't chaos. It wasn't just random piracy. No way. They ran headfirst into a calculated, relentless, and incredibly effective system of control. And the whole thing was being run by just one woman. Her power, you see, it grew from a very specific place, the city of Tétouan. And this was not just any old port. This city was built with a mission, forged in the fire of exile, and fueled by a really powerful sense of grievance. See, the people who built Tétouan were refugees, Andalusi families who had just been kicked out of their homes in Iberia. But they didn't just show up with their grief. They came with incredible skills. These were master shipwrights, expert traders, brilliant map makers. And they took all that loss and pain and channeled it into building a fortress of defiance. And this created this amazing, self-sustaining cycle of power. Think about it. The memory of what they'd lost, that shaped their entire policy. The constant need for defense, that dictated who they traded with and where. And the money from that trade, it went right back into building an even stronger defense. It was this brilliant loop of survival and strength. So from this powerful home base, she projected her authority out onto the water, and she did it directly and without a single apology. Make no mistake, she was not a figurehead. She was a commander. And this is so important to understand. Her rule wasn't some behind-the-scenes thing, where she's whispering in the ear of a husband or a brother. Not at all. Her authority was public, it was absolute, and everybody knew it, from the local merchants all the way up to the kings of Europe. I mean, she was incredibly hands-on, a true micromanager of the sea, you could say. Orders to her fleets, they came straight from her. Maritime policy, she set it. Taxation, security, that was her too. There were zero intermediaries. If you wanted to do business, or if you wanted to wage war in her waters, you dealt with her directly. And because her leadership got results, everyone, friend and foe alike, had to acknowledge her power. And this slide really shows you why her control was so total. The Strait of Gibraltar, it wasn't just a stretch of water, it was basically the main valve for global trade. And she had her hand on the lever. She knew exactly when to open it up for friendly business and when to slam it shut on her enemies. She was literally weaponizing geography. So this brings up a huge question, right? How did the two most powerful navies in the world at the time get so completely outplayed? Well, the answer comes down to a fundamental, and for them, a pretty fatal miscalculation. The Spanish and Portuguese just kept sending these massive fleets, thinking that sheer numbers would solve the problem. But here's what they didn't get. They weren't fighting disorganized pirates. No. Her attacks were timed, her captures were targeted, the pressure she put on them was systematic. What they were facing was a coherent foreign policy, executed at sea. It was a total misread of the situation. Europe saw her being selective with her attacks, her restraint, and they thought it was weakness. They just couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that it was actually a deliberate strategy designed to apply the most pressure with the least amount of risk. They assumed North Africa was passive, and instead they found this incredibly coordinated resolve.
And then she leveled up. She formed an alliance with the legendary Ottoman admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa. This was a game changer. It fused her precise local control of the Straits with his massive reach across the whole Mediterranean. All of a sudden, the Iberian navies were stretched to their breaking point, fighting a coordinated war on two fronts. Now, Europe called it piracy. Let's be real. It was organized warfare.
Okay, so if she was this effective, a ruler who literally stopped superpowers in their tracks, why don't we all know her name? Seriously, Why isn't she as famous as Barbarossa or Ferdinand and Isabella? The answer is kind of chilling, and it shows us that history isn't just written, it's edited.
So why was such a powerful ruler systematically, almost surgically, erased from mainstream history? The reasons tell us just as much about how we write history as they do about her actual life. And it wasn't an accident. It was a process of deliberate erasure.
When you look at the historical records, the bias is just fascinating. The Muslim chroniclers from the region, they focused on what mattered: her results, her effectiveness, her competence as a ruler. But the European writers, they were deeply unsettled by her gender. They couldn't stop talking about it, because a woman holding that much direct power just didn't compute in their world.
And then later on, colonial historians basically curated the archives. They wanted to tell a simple story of inevitable European dominance. And a powerful Muslim woman who forced Christian kings to negotiate? Well, that just complicated the narrative way too much. So they downplayed her story, let her name fade, and focused on the men around her instead.
So, bringing her story back into the light isn't just a fun piece of historical trivia. It's a direct challenge to a lot of the big stories we've been taught to accept as fact. For example, you're told that women, especially in the Muslim world of this era, had no real authority, no public power. Sayyida al-Hurra governed openly and commanded fleets.
You're told that resistance to European expansion was basically futile. Noble maybe, but doomed. And yet, for decades, her resistance wasn't just symbolic. It was successful.
Her very existence, her success, her entire reign, it's a massive correction to these flawed versions of history. Sayyida al-Hurra proves the story we've been told is far from complete.
And maybe this is the biggest lesson of all. We tend to think of power as always expanding, always conquering. Her power was different. It was the power of defense, the power of sovereignty. It was the power of holding a line and just refusing to move. Europe didn't conquer her waters. They learned to fear them.
Which leaves us with one last, kind of unsettling thought. If a ruler this effective could be so completely buried by history, who else is missing from the story? How many other names were erased, not because they failed, but because their success just didn't fit the story the victors wanted to tell?